Hello, welcome back to the Wolf's Corner. I am your host, and today we are beginning our new lore series. Based on your votes, we are going to explore the Badab War, the brutal 12-year conflict that saw several entire chapters of Space Marines betray the Imperium. As with the Siege of Rex, we will start by talking about the background of the conflict, and to do that, we have to talk about the Maelstrom Zone. When you think about warp storms, I imagine that many of you first think about the infamous Eye of Terror, right? Well, the Maelstrom is not quite as big as the Eye, but it is a massive warp rift which has torn a hole between the physical universe and the warp. Now, unlike the Eye of Terror, the Maelstrom was not formed by the hedonistic pursuits of an entire race murder-sexing a warp god into existence. In fact, the Maelstrom is believed to be older than humanity has even existed. Further separating the two, while the Eye of Terror is a swirling mass of warp energy that will just as likely hurl you across the galaxy like a stone thrown across a lake as let you sail to your destination in relative tranquility, the Maelstrom is actually quite stable. Now, when I say stable, I mean in terms of how stable a freaking warp rift or storm can be stable. After all, the Maelstrom is still so volatile and ever-changing that trying to effectively map, patrol, or even conquer the place is as possible as building a castle on a giant mound of loose sand. But despite this danger, the Maelstrom has seen a lot of people and things come to it and establish themselves both inside and around its ever-changing borders. In fact, the Imperium's researchers have suspected that even during the Dark Age of technology, humans established themselves around the giant warp rift. However, peaceful colonists have not been the only ones to take advantage of the Maelstrom's relative stability. Because the paths into the Maelstrom are relatively passable, countless pirates, raiders, outcasts, renegades, exiles, and other best-forgotten horrors have gotten into the Maelstrom seeking a safe haven. From within, they either fight amongst themselves for the spoils there, or strike out against the Imperium of Man bordering the storm. During the Great Crusade, the Imperium tried to enter the Maelstrom and clean it out like they had and would do to countless other regions of space. However, the Maelstrom was a far different beast. Hundreds of starships and thousands, if not millions, of Imperial troops were lost in this effort. The Emperor decided to pull his forces away from the Maelstrom and declare the region off limits, much like what happened with Vrax after the siege. Think about that. During the height of the Great Crusade, when the Imperium's might was far and above what it is in the 41st millennium, they could still not conquer the Maelstrom. This should give you an idea of what type of place we're dealing with here. However, while the Maelstrom itself was off limits, the Imperium knew that they could not simply ignore the place. So when that wonderful business that was the Horus Heresy ended, good old Primarch Robite Guilliman ordered the regions around the Maelstrom reinforced. For all the problems of the Ultramarines and their Primarchs in both the lore and with many of the books written about them, at the very least the Primarch understood that all those wonderful fellows who decided to squat in the Maelstrom were far too dangerous to be left alone. So for the next several thousand years, the region around the Maelstrom was built up, much like the area around the Eye of Terror. Several important outposts rose in the 38th and 39th millennia to guard the Imperium's interests in the region. Three particular outposts became the linchpins of Imperial trade and travel through the Maelstrom. The star systems Synax, Segan, and Badab allowed the resources in the Maelstrom Zone to flow out of the hands of traders and into the coffers of other, more established Imperial sectors. And they stayed this way for centuries. But, as with most good things in this galaxy, sooner or later it all fell apart. By the midpoint of the 41st millennium, the world of Synax had become a mirror version of Cadia, a heavily militarized hive world that formed the central linchpin in the Imperial defenses around the northern part of the Maelstrom. It was also the most heavily populated world in the region. But in the year 557 of the same millennium, an onrushing warp storm suddenly caused the corruption that always existed in such worlds to explode at the same time that Chaos forces launched an attack. Synax fell apart as Imperial Guard fought Death Cult Nihilists supported by the Chaos Warband, the Reborn. Even though the loyal Space Marine chapter, the Mantis Warriors, came to help the Imperials, the Death Cult managed to get a hold of the world's missile defense network. And what do you think this group of suicidal madmen did after getting a hold of an entire system of missiles more powerful than all the nuclear weaponry on Earth today? You guessed it, they launched the atomic and plasma missiles from the defense network. only they shot them back at the world itself. This not only shattered all the hive cities of Synax, but it also disrupted the planet's orbit for several years. You can probably imagine the impact this much devastation had on the planet. The permanent nuclear winter, radioactive fallout, and tectonic madness from the shift in orbit wiped out every single trace of life on Synax. Well done, Death Cultists. Without this world, plus other losses that the Imperium had suffered over the previous centuries, Imperial authority in the northern regions around the Maelstrom fell apart. This did not just affect the local region. Military supply chains all the way to the worlds of Baka and even Terra were threatened. The High Lords of Terra decided to act on this. Now the Maelstrom Warders enter our story. In 587 M41, those High Lords declared an Edict Imperialis that ordered several entire Space Marine chapters to deploy around the Maelstrom Zone to protect Imperial interests and calm the region. This force was originally composed of 2 fleet-based and 2 planet-based chapters. These were the Lamenters and the Charnel Guard as the fleet chapters, and the planet chapters were the Mantis Warriors, you know, the ones who tried to stop the Death Cults from blowing up Synax, and we know how well that worked out. And last, but certainly not least, the Astral Clause. These guys were given the honor of being in charge of the entire force because of past actions in Imperial service. For their new home, they chose a battle station above the world Badab Primaris in the same name system. I think you can all guess that the reason this is called the Badab War has something to do with these guys. But not going to spoil that just yet. After all the chapters were nice and cozy in the Maelstrom Zone, an Imperial Navy squadron was added to the Warders as a permanent addition to their forces. This addition and the combined might of all 4 chapters allowed the Imperium to quickly stabilize the regions and purge the inner zone around the Maelstrom of heretics and Xenos, which had been causing them so much trouble. In short order, the Maelstrom Zone's wealth was once again flowing into the wider Imperium's coffers. Eventually, the Warders decided to launch an offensive operation against the Maelstrom called the Scourge Campaign in 640 M41. For 11 years, they struck deep into the Maelstrom, bringing the fight to their enemies. Initially, all was going to plan. Unfortunately, though, the Sloss in the Administratum were just as bad, if not worse, for the Warders as they had been for the 80th Siege Army on Vrax. Orders came that the Charnel Guard chapter was no longer part of the Warders and were to withdraw and deploy to the Veiled region as part of the Thanatos Crusade. Yeah, an entire chapter doing plenty of good work in one zone, suddenly getting yanked away to fight in a crusade on the other side of the galaxy for no reason other than someone in the Adeptus Terra deciding they should. The loss of a quarter of their main fighting force did not go well for the Warders, who had to end their campaign, and over the next 2 decades they suffered more setbacks and very high casualties. While this was occurring, the Astral Clause were petitioning the High Lords for a new chapter to replace the Charnel Guard in the Warders. Unfortunately, they were denied this request. And this could not have come at a worse time for the Warders, because the Maelstrom was suddenly overflowing with demon incursions and pirate raids. This increase in activity forced them into a more defensive position around the worlds they protected and made them give up all activity near the borders of the Maelstrom itself. Now, you might be thinking, this situation can't possibly get worse, right? Just wait, it gets worse. Orcs coming out of the Maelstrom struck deep into the Badab sector itself in what would be called the Battle of Hell Cirrus. The chapter master of the Astral Clause and overall commander of the Maelstrom Orders, Rovik Blake, went against his own doctrine, smart move mate, and chased the orcs back into the Maelstrom itself. There, he was killed in single combat by the war boss Vorg Manburner. 3 guesses how he got that name, after having led his chapter for 200 years. The Astral Clause managed to retrieve their chapter master's body, but still had to retreat from the Maelstrom and return to Badab. For the brothers of this chapter, it was a very dark time indeed. And there we will stop our story of the Badab War. When we return, we will see the rise of a new chapter master who will reinvigorate his own chapter and their allies. But we will also see his slow descent into darkness and the beginnings of the events that will lead us to the actual war. Thank you for watching this video, all Warhammer fans. If you like this series, please help the channel grow. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button. And while we're just starting the new series, what would you all like to see after we're done with Badab? Another series like it in Vrax? or perhaps something else in the 40k universe? Please post your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always, for more great Warhammer lore and fun videos, check out the links in the description below. This is the Wolf's Corner. Have a good day.